Welcome to a new review video on Seeking Eye, something that hasn't happened in a long time. But a friend of mine, Paul, who always shares my videos and forwards them, which I really do appreciate. I had on an interview with him for the podcast recently. He sent me this video called Near-Death Experiences Explained Without Religion by a channel called No Nonsense Spirituality, or Britt Hartley, I suppose is the name of the host. And I think it's looking more at a natural explanation for near-death experiences rather than a metaphysical or a non-physical kind of one. As always, I never look at these videos beforehand, so I'm going at it fresh as you're watching this now. Just gives us kind of a more authentic view, I think. Ongoing, I'm thinking for Seeking Eye to help kind of incentivize the new membership feature that I've added. I'm going to make these non-podcast videos and the kind of the supplementary videos like this members only content, and that just incentivizes people that are watching. If you'd like to kind of help support Seeking Eye so I can keep especially the podcast, which is the important one with the chats with professionals and experts on the subjects, to keep that as accessible as possible. These extra videos on the side will be for members only to help really support Seeking Eye. If you'd like to do that, that would be absolutely fantastic. Just click on the membership button below and see if it's something you'd be interested in for these kind of extra content videos. But this one's just going to be a normal public video since it is the first one in a long time. So let's go ahead and see what Britt has to say about NDEs.
All right, I know that this video is going to make some people sad or mad, and then I'm going to trigger something. So today we are going to do NDEs, near-death experiences, and this is honestly in modern times where we have collectively placed a lot of faith in order to kind of find a new way to cheat death. So this isn't just some like ivory tower idea where I'm just going to ask you like, oh, consider the ethics of this. Like, people have their identity wrapped around these stories pointing to something real. And if I challenge that, they get very upset, the way that a religious person discredits you when you say something that challenges their identity. So
I think the thing with NDEs is because they're so personal, and many people kind of come back, to use that term, with a knowing that what happened to them was real. Of course, for them, perfect. For us who are looking at it from the outside, that's not enough for us to know for sure. And I think that kind of that feeling of knowing creates as she said, it becomes part of one's identity. So having that challenge is almost like an existential challenge to your own mind and your own belief system. So I can understand why people would get frustrated with that.
This is a video where I know going into this that I'm going to make people very upset. And just to be clear, before people come at me and accuse me of being closed-minded or being biased towards materialism, just know that I want to be wrong about this. Like, I am a mother, and as such, I'm fundamentally not okay with the idea that one day my child will want to come talk to me and I won't be there. Like, I'm okay with not being okay, but I'll never like fully be okay about that. So I want there to be magic here. I really do. I just haven't found.
Approaching it from that way, I think, is already setting a kind of a fundamental issue in the sense of the way that you're going to look at the rest of this topic. If you invoke magic, which is certainly kind of, most people would think of it like that, but magic, lightning was magic many, many years ago before we understood what it was. Magic is effectively science that is yet to be understood. So anything related to NDEs and the way that the mind works, if there is continuation after death, is not a matter of magic or miracle, or I don't think, divine involvement. I think it's more just the nature of the universe, the nature of reality that we haven't fully come to grasp with yet, and are kind of at the stage at the moment of identifying a strange phenomena that doesn't seem to be explainable. At least many aspects of it don't seem to be explainable as of yet. So anything that is out of our current ability to measure or to understand is going to seem like a miracle or like magic.
Found enough evidence that warrants a jump into the supernatural. So I'm going to lay all that out and then ask you guys what you think. But just know that even though I'm skeptical, I do want to be wrong. Like, that is my bias. I do want to be wrong. So you tell me.
Supernatural is another word that kind of is painted in the wrong way, I think, because anything that anybody would consider supernatural to me is natural, just not understood yet.
You tell me what you think at the end of this, if you can make it through this video, because we've got a lot to cover. So thousands of people around the world report the same strange experience after being clinically dead or near death. They're floating above their bodies. They're traveling through a tunnel. seeing a light, meeting beings of love? Are these just glimpses of the afterlife? Are these just tricks of a dying brain? And so in this video, we're going to really focus in on a no-nonsense approach at looking.
Interestingly as well, these experiences also take place phenomenologically very similar, maybe with slight differences, when one is in meditation, or indeed when one is expecting to be dead soon, but isn't actually in any physical kind of danger. If one's falling off a cliff, one will report a near-death experience, at least phenomenologically, a near-death experience while they're falling, before they're in any kind of physical damage or anything at all. So one can argue that that's a fully mental construct and an emotional response, I suppose, which is reasonable. I don't know much about those, but again, near-death experiences as proof of an afterlife is an incorrect way of looking at it. It's a phenomenon that needs to be taken into account and understood, and then kind of taken as a whole, as a part of a whole phenomenology with various other experiences, before answering or trying to answer such an important question as is there life after death. No one phenomena is going to cut it, I don't think, on its own.
Looking at near-death experiences. What are they? What are they not? And what might this tell us about consciousness and death? And I want to be as open as I can to the possibilities without jumping headfirst into nonsense without reason.
Good.
And so again, at the end, I just would like to know what you think about this one, because this is a topic that people will get really mad about.
Whenever approaching any phenomena that seems like, to quote Brit, supernatural, or unusual, I suppose, one should always strive to look for a natural explanation first before jumping to the possibility that it's, quote, supernatural or as of yet kind of an unexplained thing. Because a lot of times that I've seen, there's a lot of experiences and a lot of phenomena that people have encountered, mainly things like ghosts and orbs and whatever, things like that, that are presumed to be supernatural, that have a perfectly reasonable explanation, EMF readers, all that sort of thing. Although I think there seem to be genuine cases where material explanations don't work, one should always look for material explanations first before jumping or assuming that it must be supernatural, for want of a better term.
I've even had people on TikTok, when I've talked about this, say like, okay, now I'm going to be sad all day because whatever I was talking about really challenged their beliefs in NDEs. And so I know that that's coming, is all I'm going to say. So let's dive in. A near-death experience is exactly what it sounds like. It's something that happens to people when they're clinically dead or right at the edge of death, like a heart attack, major trauma, drowning, and while under deep anesthesia. As they say in The Princess Bride, mostly dead is better than all dead. And the stories people tell are surprisingly consistent. You've probably heard the stories. Someone dies on the operating table, their heart stops, they have no brain waves, and then suddenly they're floating.
Having no brainwaves is a questionable one. I don't know how many of the cases have been confirmed as having zero brainwaves, or at least, a flat EEG. Pam Reynolds is one where there was, because her brain was frozen effectively to a level where it wasn't possible, just because of the nature of the procedure she was undergoing. But I think there's very few that are actually confirmed as being flat EEG, because during cardiac arrest or whatever other, a lot of these happen naturally, not in a hospital setting, and even if they do, they're often in situations where there's no EEG being read at the time. So although there are cases such as that.
Above their body, they're watching the doctors work on them, they feel very calm, there's a tunnel, there's light, sometimes there's loved ones, sometimes it's like God itself, sometimes they're told it's not your time, and then just like that they're back in their body and they change. Like there's like these experiences change people, like their fear of death will go down, for example,
go down and often, very often, disappear entirely, replaced with kind of that knowledge, as I say, which is difficult for me to comment on because that's an experiential thing. Having a certain amount of knowledge of not dying would, of course, eliminate your fear of death. At least knowledge to the experiencer's understanding of reality. As I say, for those of us looking at it from an outside perspective who haven't had that experience, that kind of level of knowledge is impossible, because we can only work through our intellect, I suppose, to try and answer these questions.
Just like when you do psychedelics, often people will have less fear of death after that for the rest of their life.
I'm pausing this a lot, and what I might do is go through this entire video but split it up into different parts. I'll do the first one as a public video, then the rest as a membership only thing. So yeah, and a good friend of mine actually underwent some psychedelic research for, I think it was like a test for I think it was ketamine induced kind of therapy and that kind of idea, and she came back again with this knowledge of I'm 100% certain, and this is the sort of person that wouldn't say that, but I'm 100% certain experientially that we continue after death through this psychedelic experience. Again, for me personally and for others outside, it's difficult because there's always that question of, well, but it's a psychedelic, how do you know it was real and not just this chemical playing tricks on your mind? But she is adamant, and as I say, she's one of those people that would not say such a statement unless she was very, very confident. So again, it's an experiential thing, I suppose, with these.
So this seems to be not a new phenomenon either. We don't know how old this is in our history, but Plato talked about a soldier who died in battle and came back to life and described another realm. We have the Tibetan Buddhist Book of the Dead, which outlines visions that occur in the space between death and rebirth, and they do have some evidence of exploring this space. But the modern fascination with NDEs really exploded in 1975 when a
and also for historic NDEs and NDEs and religious experiences throughout time, go and have a look at Dr. Gregory Shushan's work. He's very good at the historic spiritual experiences and NDEs and afterlife beliefs, etc. I imagine she's going to talk about Raymond Moody's book Life After Life now, 1975.
Psychiatrist named Raymond Moody published a life called Life After Life, and that's when the term near-death experience took off. So since then, we've seen thousands of stories, many in hospitals and ERs and during surgeries, and today you can, of course, find entire YouTube channels and books full of these stories. Some are from...
And indeed, the term NDE has been contested recently by Dr. Sampania, who believes it's an inaccurate term and prefers the term RED, recalled experiences of death, because he believes that near death doesn't sufficiently explain the state in which these people are in, because he believes it to be actual death, that they are actually experiencing death, although a temporary version of it for those that are brought back, of course.
From deeply religious people. Some are from atheists who came back completely transformed and say now they believe in something after death. Some are from children. Even blind people report some visual imagery during NDEs, which really challenges our...
An important inclusion on that are people also that are blind from birth, so don't have that experience of visual experience, which to me is difficult because as someone who, not myself, luckily, touch wood, but as someone who is born blind and then talks about seeing things, you can't discern exactly if what they're describing as sight is actually what we experience as sight, as visual experiences. So it's difficult because you're working off of, again, these experiences are very ineffable unless you experience them yourself, because how can you glean exactly what you're trying to express from the point of view of something you've never experienced before or cannot explain, if you know what I mean there?
Understanding of perception. So if you're spiritual or religious, you might just instantly see this as proof that the soul continues after death, that we return to a place of love or light, and that there's something more to life. If you're a skeptic, you may just say, this is what a dying brain does.
That wouldn't necessarily be skepticism. That would be jumping, begging the question that this is already not possible. A skeptic, or at least in the terms of what I would consider, actual skepticism, wouldn't necessarily jump to the conclusion that this can all be explained by the brain. It would be, here's this phenomenon that seems, very otherworldly. I don't think I don't think necessarily that it is non-physical or whatever, but it could be. So let me go and look into it more and read the literature and understand exactly what I'm critiquing before I do so, and then maybe I'll be wrong. It's being skeptical is not pushing your own or projecting your own philosophy on top of something just because it doesn't fit. It's really looking into the phenomena and trying to understand it before drawing a definite conclusion. And of course, just not assuming it to be physical or non-physical ad hoc.
As oxygen drops, as brain systems shut down, the visual cortex can create these tunnel-like effects. A flood of endorphins might explain the euphoria. Maybe the brain releases DMT, which is a powerful hallucinogen. The whole
All of these have been deeply explored as well. Have a look at the work of the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies and those that work within there. A lot of these a lot of these explanations have been examined closely and have found no link, I believe. At least there was no link when I last really looked at these and spoke with some of those who have done so, like Dr. Bruce Grayson. I'm not going to say there's no link. I can't give that accurately. I can't say that accurately. So I'll say, as far as I'm aware, there's no correlation between blood gases or dimethyltryptamine production or certain endorphins being released to explain these phenomena. DMT, dimethyltryptamine, is theorized. I believe it's theorized. It might be proven to be secreted by humans from the pineal gland, although the amount of which has been determined to be released at death is in question as to whether that's powerful enough to create these kind of experiences or not.
thing could just be a last comforting dream while the brain is crashing. So let's lay out what happens in an NDE and the possible explanations on the table. So the first thing that really stands out is out-of-body experiences. This is something I've experienced many times, not because I've died many times, just it's something that you can access in other ways than dying. This is
usually through meditation or so-called astral travel, which is effectively, it's pretty amazing if it's true, but it's pretty much just a self-induced out-of-body experience, which then is claimed you can travel throughout different dimensions or around the world, or at the speed of thought or whatever. Again, how true that is, I don't know. It's another thing you'd have to really experience, I think, firsthand to know. There are, of course, books such as Robert Monroe's books, Journeys Out of the Body, etc. I think it's Far Journeys, Journeys Out of the Body, and another one I can't remember, but that includes kind of more evidential cases of the experiences that he had, and they were able to be verified through physical means. Again, it's really, he was a big researcher, but from my point of view anyway, as someone who hadn't experienced it, I have no choice but to take people's words for it. So unless one experiences these things themselves, it's difficult to say. But point being, yes, you don't have to be near death to have an out-of-body experience.
Is when someone feels like they've left their physical body and they're floating above it. And it's interesting that it's really never below it. It's always above. And they might describe hovering near the ceiling, seeing the doctors or paramedics working on them, and feeling.
Just trying to think, have I heard of any cases? I know I've heard of cases where they're above the body and off to the side. I don't think I've ever heard of a case where they're below the body.
So sometimes the person just finds themselves in the second aspect, which is being outside of their body, their consciousness functioning outside their body, watching the material world. And I call this the material aspect because they're observing the material world, usually from a position above, but sometimes it can be from the side or even below.
That's quite an interesting point. I've never really thought about that.
Totally calm and detached. It's one of the most commonly reported features of NDEs, and it's very powerful. It makes people feel like they must have some kind of soul or consciousness that's separate from their brain and body.
Which, if anybody were to experience that, of course, that would be kind of the first thing you'd think, well, I'm up here, my body's down here, therefore I must be not my body. Anybody would think that, I'm pretty sure.
But here's the thing, OBEs don't just happen during near-death situations. We can actually reproduce this in a lab.
If she's going to talk about the Blunky studies here, possibly. If so, there is a slight difference in phenomenology, but we'll see.
Could give you a guided meditation. Those take a long time, or a drug right now, or put you in a lab and push on your brain and give you this experience. I've done both the drug side of that and the meditation side of that. And I've had powerful subjective experiences where the idea that I'm a Britney on the ground, like there would be no anchor for that thought, like I'm gone. I can go there with or without drugs. So out-of-body experiences feel incredibly real, but we have a growing amount of evidence that they are not not evidence of a soul literally leaving the body. They're experiences created by the brain, specifically a breakdown in the way that the brain is integrating sensory information about your body's position in space.
I haven't come across such evidence. I mean, I've heard of, as I say, Olaf Blunkey's study where he stimulated part of the temporal parietal junction. And of course, there are also experiences that have been measured for those that experience epilepsy. Phenomenologically, very different from an out-of-body experience experienced in near-death experiences and through meditation. Drugs, I don't know, and I wouldn't consider those evidential unless there was any kind of veridical perception involved, because, I mean, it's a question of what psychedelic drugs do is one, straight away. We don't understand what they do. Are they hallucinogenic? Are they limiting of a brain's ability to keep us, earthbound, I suppose, for want of a bit. That sounds terrible, but for limiting our experiences as a non-physical entity, is that what they do? We don't know. What we've seen is that with psychedelics, they limit the amounts, the net amount of brain activity within the brain itself is lowered, especially in the default mode network. However, arguments are that there isn't kind of a hyper interconnectedness between all the other brain regions. Although a net lower amount, the brain is perhaps more integrally connected, I suppose, and communicating, which could be an argument for hallucinogenic kind of effects. But again, comparing hallucinogenic experiences, hallucination experiences to out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, again, phenomenologically incredibly different, even in terms of after effects and things like that. If Brittany's had these experiences in drugs and through meditation and they're the same, I don't know. That's something she'd know a lot more than me, who hasn't had that experience. So if there are similarities there, I can more than understand that would be quite compelling for this being some kind of chemical interaction going on in the brain. But in terms of reproducing it in a lab, the phenomenology is too different for that to be considered a genuine out-of-body experience, at least in the way that we understand it to be in near-death experiences.
So there's one part of the brain in particular called the TPJ.
Yeah.
It sits at
Temporal
the
parietal
intersection
junction.
of where your brain processes vision, touch, balance, and body awareness. And when scientists stimulate this area, like with electrodes in an epilepsy patient, they can induce the sensation of leaving the body.
No. I mean, from what I know, again, this is Olaf Blunkey, stimulating the temporal parietal junction, which, as Brittany correctly says, kind of solidifies your experience in space and time from the perception of your body. However, what the experience was reported to be was kind of a sensation of expanding, I suppose, of like their arms growing or the legs growing or being kind of sitting up and leaning up. Certainly was not the same experience as an out-of-body experience experienced in experience. It was certainly not the same as the out-of-body perceptions in near-death experiences and others.
Like if I could get into your brain and touch your brain, you would experience this. And people will say things like, I'm floating, or I'm seeing myself from above. And this happens even though they're still lying on the table fully awake. And also when you do this and try to put like an object like on top of a counter and ask them to try to see it, they actually won't see anything.
Have a look at the late Dr. Charles Tart's experiment with Miss C, which is questioned to be uncontrolled. Fair enough, but I've spoken to the guy and he's adamant as a scientist. Again, not much use in terms of a scientific experiment because there are questions about shoddy methodology, but that was also replicated by Dr. Stanley Krippner as well, with successful results. So there are cases where people have come out of their body, and as well, of course, I mentioned earlier Robert Monroe, who experimented with himself as the participant. He came out of his body and seeing targets with successful results. So there are cases where that happens. She's probably looking more on the ideas of Penny Sartori, Sam Pioneer, etc. more recently, who had no hits on the targets that they put targets out of sight of a regular experience. Unless one was out of their body, they could see it. Which garnered no results. That's more a case of numbers and sample sizes rather than the phenomenon not being genuine.
And so we've tried this in labs to see if you're actually leaving your body, and we don't have any evidence for that. We don't have any like smoking gun evidence for that. So in 2007, researchers in Switzerland conducted a famous experiment where they used virtual reality and this tactile stimulation to mess with somebody's body perception. It's a wild study, honestly. So here's how it works. A person wore goggles, showing them a video of themselves from behind. And then the experimenter tapped the person's brain while simultaneously showing them tapping in the VR feed. And the brain started to get confused.
So their brain was then equating this virtual reality sprite, I suppose, with being them, because, of course, their brain is feeling the tap on the shoulder and seeing the virtual reality character being tapped on the shoulder, so it's confused. It thinks that should be me, but it's not, and it's kind of beginning to associate itself with that sprite.
The participant began to identify with the virtual body they were seeing rather than their actual body. So some felt like they were floating behind themselves, disconnected from their physical body. Another famous example is sleep.
Although that's not the phenomena. That's a simulation of the phenomena. So, I mean, being able to kind of simulate, again, this phenomenologically different, and this isn't taking into account veridical perception. And, I mean, Brittany did mention that there are no experimental evidence of out-of-body experiences, which there is. Of course, I think there is from what I've seen and people I've spoken to who have done them. It is common perception that there isn't, so that's more than understandable to hold that position. I think if she were to look into some of the UVA, University of Virginia perceptual studies and speak to some of those like Stan Krippner and others who have done these experiments, Robert Monroe and Charlie Tartler unfortunately have passed, so we can't talk to them, although Monroe did record them in his books. Again, how much credence do you put into someone's book? It's difficult to say, but there is also a guy called Tom Campbell who worked closely with Monroe, and it'd be interesting for Brittany to talk to these people just to see what kind of experimental work has been done in these people, because I think there is evidence to suggest it, quite good evidence to suggest that there is veridical perception involved. But yeah, point being mainly, one, being able to simulate the perceived experience of an out-body experience isn't necessarily disproving the experience itself, or proving that because the brain can be tricked into sensing itself as being something separate doesn't necessarily mean that it causes the genuine phenomena. Especially alongside, as I say, I believe that there is evidence to support that these external perceptions can be made accurately.
Paralysis. This is when your brain is asleep, but your mind, your body is asleep, but your mind is awake, and people report out-of-body experiences during this state.
It's reported that sleep paralysis is one of the first stages of experiencing an out-of-body experience. Most people call that kind of astral projection. That's just pop culture, what it's known as. But sleep paralysis is effectively when you're on the cusp of wake and sleep. Your mind's awake, your consciousness is awake and in the world, but your body is paralyzed and asleep. So, yeah.
Float, some see their own sleeping body, some even feel like they can move through walls or ceilings, but all of this is tied to how the brain is processing sensory input or lack thereof during REM sleep. So
I haven't seen these studies. I wouldn't be able to give an opinion on them, although I have, as I say, I've spoken to a lot of people who have reported and researched these out-of-body experiences. I've never seen or heard them discuss this kind of link as being definite. It's certainly a possibility. I've never seen it as being a definite kind of a definite causal link, though.
OBEs feel incredibly real. You really can put on some VR goggles and I'll push on your brain and you will feel like you are your VR body. Like that seems to be something that we can reproduce in a lab.
Simulate in a lab.
But now we have to consider, like, does it point to something more? Because the brain is capable of creating incredibly convincing illusions. Just because something feels real doesn't mean that it is real. Think about dreams. You can dream of flying. You can dream of visiting dead relatives or talking to people that you've never met. And in that moment, like I had a dream last night, I was like in court for something, which I'm going to have to explore why I'm in court being judged about something. And I woke up and like, there was that half second where like, oh, that's a dream. I'm in reality. But when I was in it just a few seconds before, it felt like reality, right?
And even when you have third person dreams and you're kind of experiencing yourself from outside of yourself, but watching yourself move around and kind of controlling it remotely in a way, still you believe it's real in the dream, even though it makes absolutely no sense. But the difference is when you come out of those experiences, as well as when you come out of psychosis-induced like hallucinations like schizophrenia, etc., again, phenomenologically, very, very different. It's been pretty much determined through those who have actually spent the time researching the phenomena of near-death experiences, deathbed visions, out-of-body experiences, etc., that these cannot be reasonably classified as hallucinations. They are just phenomenologically and experientially very, very, very different. One will wake up in the morning and say that, yes, I had this dream and I was dreaming. One very, very, very seldom comes out of a near-death experience and says, this was a hallucination, this was not real. Almost 100% of people, I would argue to say, come out convinced that what happened to them was real. They may be skeptical, certainly, but they cannot reasonably consider what they had as hallucination from their experience. For the most part, certainly. Again, I'm not going to give a number, but it's very, very, very high from what I've seen.
Right? That's how OBEs work too. The brain
possibly
stimulates an external viewpoint and we interpret it as leaving the body. But here's the thing, if your consciousness truly left your body, you should be able to gather information you couldn't otherwise perceive.
And there are cases in which this has been done, and as I said earlier, I believe experimental evidence to show that as well. Again, look at Charlie Tart's work and Stanley Krippner's reproduction, as well as others such as Bob Monroe and the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, etc. There is this work being done, and there is evidence to support that veridical perception can take place in the real world and be confirmed afterwards.
This has been tested, like putting hidden symbols around a room. There's no good evidence that people who are experiencing out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences can report those symbols. They see.
That's true. There is, and let me just double check what she said.
There's no good evidence that people who are experiencing out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences can report those symbols.
There's no good evidence that when the symbols are placed in an experimental setting, that those who have out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences can see those symbols. There's no good evidence for that. That is correct. However, I don't believe that is because the phenomena doesn't exist or isn't genuine. I think that's because, again, as I mentioned earlier, the pure numbers needed. So we'll talk about the Sampania study, the AWARE study. 2,000 or so participants, 2,020 or so participants. From that, you had two people who had out-of-body experiences in which they found themselves in the real world able to see things, and who survived long enough afterwards to be interviewed. Those two cases out of, remember, 2,000 people, those two cases, that's 0.2%, took place in a room where the targets were not placed. So in order for this evidence to be gathered on the sheer mathematics of the issue, you would need a huge number of hospitals across the world with a huge number of patients taking part, and then you've got the issue of ethics of performing such studies, etc. So I think the failure of these experiments is more for that reason rather than, and certainly cannot be used as evidence that the phenomena doesn't exist. I think that's wrong to conclude as such from these experiments as they've been done thus far.
See what they expect to see, not necessarily what's actually there. The brain fills that in even when your eyes are closed based on what it knows subconsciously about what is going on in the room.
Depends on the context. Again, it's Pam Reynolds. The Pam Reynolds case is an important one to look at to understand. So is the Dentures case and Lloyd Rudy's patient, etc. This sort of thing. But yes, there are cases certainly where people have been in these near-death situations and their brain has filled in information that could be very reasonably, assumed from the situation. Seeing people in gowns or seeing various medical equipment like tongs and whatever else. Anybody can assume that that's what happens in a hospital setting, and reasonably so. Their brain would fill in those gaps during hallucination to make sense of it. However, there are also cases to supplement those where things have been seen that are far beyond the reaches of what one could reasonably assume would be found in such settings. The case of someone who saw an amputated arm in a different operating theatre within the hospital in a yellow bag, and it was found to be there. That's just one example that comes to mind because I was talking about that quite recently. But there are others, and it's very interesting to look at when you are very deeply, aware of some of these cases in the literature around them. But they do exist.